Welcome to The Call, an exclusive conversation hosted by the Chamber's Global Intelligence Desk. We're delighted you are able to join us. Please note the views of our guests today are not necessarily those of the Chamber, but we hope you will find those views as valuable as we do. Let's get started. Good morning, and welcome to The Call, brought to you by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce here in Washington. I am your host, Jay Sapsford, and here's today's question of the moment. How secure is America's advantage in artificial intelligence? AI, the key to both economic growth and national security, is evolving at a breathtaking rate. While America has long led AI innovation, that dominance is now under pressure. Competitors like China are making rapid strides in adopting AI not only for civilian use, but also for the battlefield. Our guest today is the co-author of an action plan for the Trump administration to secure our advantage. It includes measures to build out energy infrastructure, leverage more public-private partnerships, keep chips out of the hands of rivals, and accelerate the use of AI in the military. Joining us now is Paul Scharre, the Executive Vice President at the Center for a New American Security and a former Pentagon official. He is the author of Four Battlegrounds, Power in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. Paul, welcome to The Call.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Paul, let's dive right in. I was surprised to read that one of the biggest threats to U.S. dominance isn't necessarily our rivals, but it's the lack of the energy infrastructure needed to support what's going to be a massive demand for energy in the as we roll out this technology on scale. I wonder if you could tell us about that.
That's right. So in this race, one of the obstacles that we are facing is energy to support the data centers that are needed to power AI. AI is incredibly computationally intensive. And as AI becomes more capable, yes, we're going to see models that are smaller, that are able to run on less computing power. But as they become more efficient, demand for AI is going to go up. And so in aggregate across the nation, to effectively deploy AI, to use it across our economy, we're going to need massive data centers running these chips, and they need an enormous amount of energy. And that's a place where the federal government can play a really constructive role in streamlining permitting and making regulations easier to build out the power that we need to then support this data center growth.
So failure to do that sort of permitting reform and the other steps that we need to do this would have us sort of coming under pressure, I would think, because in the case of China, for instance, as an authoritarian government, they can just by mandate say, okay, give me 5 nuclear power plants that'll support their AI rollout. We've got to be able to keep pace with that, right?
That's right. So if this becomes a contest in who can build more power faster, that's one that's definitely to China's advantage. And so we want to make sure that we are growing enough power to keep pace with the US advantage in AI and in chips so that we can stay ahead of China. That if we give up that lead that we have, which is a narrow one today, then we risk falling behind.
Paul, let's talk about talent. We are going to need a lot of talent in order to develop these models, particularly if we're going to roll them out and to some extent on a global level. What could we do to attract more talent in this space?
Look, the bottom line is we constrain ourselves to talent only homegrown here in the United States. We're going to be at a huge disadvantage to China. As a nation of 300 million people, we're always going to be behind a country over 1 billion people. Right. The best way that we can win this talent race is to draw the best scientists and engineers from around the world who want to come to the United States. And talk about a situation where government regulation is holding back the private sector. This is a place where our regulations about high-skilled immigration are making it more difficult for companies to then recruit the best talent from around the world. And so that's a huge asymmetric advantage that we have over China, and one that we want to capitalize. And if we don't, it's a major own goal for the United States.
Now, you also talk about restricting some technologies from getting overseas. And I just want, we're already underway with export controls, but what else can be done? I know that there's a lot, our educational system is open. People are free to participate. We do a lot of open source research. I wonder how you regulate something like that without killing the golden goose.
I think the main thing is to focus on the computing infrastructure, the hardware, and that starts with the chips. And that's really a point of leverage where we have over China, where the most advanced chips, they're not made here in the United States. They're made in Taiwan, but they're made using US technology. And that gives the United States the ability to put export controls on these chips going to China. We've seen that over the last couple of years. The US government started to put in place export controls, but we're not done there. The technology keeps evolving, the chips keep evolving. And so there are areas right now where we're still sending some really advanced chips to China that are giving China an advantage in deploying AI systems. And as we've seen in particular a shift in the last year of AI in terms of the focus of where the computing hardware is being used, from training the model up front to now how the model is being used with the new class of reasoning AI models that OpenAI developed and others are following suit on, like China's DeepSeek. We then have to then evolve the export controls as a result to make sure that we're controlling the chips that are most valuable for AI technology.
Now, you also are mentioning that we need to actually, in other areas, be more open to sharing what we have developed with our allies around the world. Why is that important? And then how do you square those two goals that seem kind of conflicting, at least on the surface?
Right, there are really three facets to this competition. One is running faster here in the United States, and so things like energy build out are key. Another one is holding back China. Controlling chips are key. But the third one is winning the global competition for the technology that's deployed around the world. We don't want another Huawei moment where the US falls behind a Chinese competitor in global deployment of this technology. And we have a huge advantage right now where other countries want US chips. They want US cloud companies to be building data centers in their countries. They want US AI companies deploying their models. We've got to make it easier for countries to do that, but that should come with some strings attached in some cases. And we might tell countries, look, you can have US technology, but in order for us to trust you, you've got to get Chinese tech out of your critical infrastructure. That's a point of leverage for the United States that we want to use, but we need to have a proactive agenda in promoting US tech abroad.
Now, in your action plan, I was fascinated to note that there is a way that we can fight Chinese censorship through the use of by rolling out our own large language models that mirror theirs, but remove some of what they put in to restrict ideas that they find unsavory. I wonder if you could explain why, how we would do that, and why that's important.
Sure. So one of the things that we saw a couple months ago with some of DeepSeek's developments, the Chinese AI company that rolled out a model really not far behind in terms of performance behind OpenAI's leading models, was that those Chinese models, they're censored, of course, because the Chinese Communist Party censors inside the country. And so when China releases open source models, these are going to be censored. They're not going to talk about the Tiananmen Square massacre. They're only going to say nice things about the Chinese Communist Party. One of the things that we should be doing is having a plan in place to rapidly strip these models of their censorship. And so when a Chinese company releases an open source model, that is to say the model itself is released, but it's censored, right? I mean, it's not really open. That within a day, we have US companies that have then released an updated version of that model that's actually free and open. And so the US can stay in the lead on open source, and we ensure that open source is not some tool to spread Chinese propaganda.
Okay, as you have been noting for years now, it's inevitable that this competition would find its way onto the battlefield. And I just wonder where we are in terms of adopting this technology in the military and what we need to focus on in the months and years ahead.
Well, there's no question we see a lot of innovation happening out on the battlefield. I was in Ukraine last year and saw some amazing things that Ukrainian drone developers are doing, embedding AI and autonomy into drones for their final attack as they're coming in on targets. But the US military is still moving at the pace that we use to develop aircraft carriers and fighter jets, and that doesn't work for AI and software. We've got to move faster. I'm encouraged by the leadership team in the Pentagon today, and the Trump administration, Secretary Hegseth and others. They're clearly energized to move fast. They're willing to institute reforms to rapidly adopt AI and software. We're already seeing some early steps coming out of the Pentagon about software adoption that are encouraging, but we need to do this because if the leading Chinese companies are only a couple months behind the leading US AI companies, but the Pentagon is 5 to 10 years behind the leading US companies, then we don't have much of an advantage at all.
Okay, one of our audience members is actually asking a question that's right on this topic. It says, how should the new Trump administration change DoD purchases and purchasing patterns and protocols to better adopt AI technologies in our defense forces? Are there specifics on this area that you're recommending?
That's right. We've got to see reform and streamlining to software acquisitions, to AI acquisitions, making it easier to use non-traditional types of acquisition tools. And we've seen some early steps, a memo coming out a couple of weeks ago out of the Pentagon about software adoption that has started to streamline the process. But there's a lot of red tape in the way. And so I think it's going to require a persistent push by Pentagon leadership to sort of tell people, we want you to be able to move fast. We want you to be willing to take risk. And when there are obstacles, let's clear those obstacles out of the way, right? Because right now we have a very risk averse system. And some of it's in the DoD, to be fair, some of it's not. Some of it's in the broader ecosystem that we see across the board. Look, when a company loses a contract, then we get protests filed, then we get lawsuits filed. And we need to find ways to stop that so that we can move faster and actually bring this technology into the DoD.
So as you bring this technology into the DoD, another one of our audience members is asking, how should military training programs evolve to incorporate the use of AI in autonomous systems?
Well, one of the things that's clear with disruptive technologies in warfare is that what matters most is not just having the technology first, or even having the best technology, but finding the best ways of using it. And so we've got to have an iterative process between the technology developers, the engineers, and the warfighters about how do we use this? Okay, so you give somebody an AI tool, it's doing object recognition. It's putting little boxes around objects in a drone video feed or on satellite imagery. How do we then take the next step to transform intelligence operations, to transform our targeting cycle? And that's going to require, warfighters getting their hands on this, and then the military culture being willing to say, okay, we're going to change how we do business, which in some cases might be uncomfortable. I think we've seen that with already drones over the last 15, 20 years, that in some cases, the instinct of some of the military services is to use these like you normally would use piloted aircraft, right? We've got a pilot in a flight suit sitting on the ground in a cockpit. It's a remotely piloted aircraft. It's not a drone. We treat it like an aircraft. And maybe we need to treat those like they're expendable systems, like they're more like munitions. So that paradigm shift of figuring out how do we change how we operate is going to be key to using the advantages of this technology.
You mentioned that you've been in Ukraine recently. What lessons are there for the U.S. military and what's happening on the ground? My understanding is that they've been incredibly innovative, because they need to be, in coming up with new ways to leverage some of these new technologies. I just wonder if there's some big takeaways from the battlefield that you saw while you were there.
There certainly are. And I think the key one is the tight integration between the drone developers and the people using them. And so I consistently heard from the Ukrainian armed forces that they prefer domestic drones over US made ones. And I said, well, why is that? And they said it's because the time cycle for improvement. Because for a lot of US developers, they might get it finally approved and certified by the DoD to deploy to the battlefield. They get some feedback on its performance. Then they got to go back, make adjustments to the technology. They got to retest it, recertify it. That's like a 12-month cycle. That's not useful out on the battlefield. Whereas that's happening in real time. I talk to drone developers who are texting with the units that are using their drones, and they're making changes to things like the frequencies to respond to Russian jamming on a daily basis. And so we need that kind of tight integration, which is different from how we think about traditional weapon systems, right? We're not tweaking the design of an aircraft carrier once it's deployed in real time, when it's out at sea, moving around things structurally inside the carrier. With AI and software, we actually have to do that. And so that's a different way for thinking about how we use the technology.
And do we have enough drone making capacity in the United States? I note that the Chinese are very big in this area, and they have some drones that are being widely deployed in the civilian sector here in the United States, in agriculture and elsewhere. I'm just wondering whether or not we're keeping pace on that front in our country, whether we need to be doing more.
Well, we do need to be doing more. It's a big challenge because on the commercial side, China has dominated the commercial drone market. And so the Defense Department has struggled because of a lack of sufficient numbers of US companies here to be price competitive. And then frankly, even when there are US companies, a lot of those components are coming from China. And so this was a big push under the Replicator initiative to scale up to larger numbers of low cost, attritable autonomous systems, not just small quadcopters, but also drones at sea, maybe more sophisticated aerial drones. but we've got to have the manufacturing capacity to do that. And this is a place where, while on the underlying technology, the DoD can rely on the private sector and things like developing the most capable AI models. For a lot of the hardware, DoD's got to build it and they got to fund it. The manufacturing capacity is not going to be there if the Defense Department doesn't spend the money. And so at the end of the day, if we want to build this hardware, the DoD's got to put its money where its mouth is. And Congress is going to have to work with the Defense Department to make sure that we're spending this money, we're building manufacturing capacity so that we can be ready to compete with China.
So all over the world right now, defense spending is suddenly taking off and growing in Europe, in Asia, and here in the United States, we're hearing rumblings out of the Trump administration that defense spending could increase. It sounds like this is one area where we're going to have to deploy a lot more capital in order to stay competitive. Is that true?
There's no question. And obviously, there's lots of room for efficiencies inside the Defense Department. But at the end of the day, the budget top line is going to have to go up, and we're going to have to spend that money wisely and make sure that we're investing in new technologies that are going to be transformative for the Defense Department and not simply the same old things that we've been spending money on in the past that in some cases are wasting assets against China. They're not going to be as capable because of investments that China has been making that can hold some of our assets at bay, whether it's aircraft carriers or shorter range fighter aircraft. We got to shift towards things that are longer range. It's not all going to be cheap, expendable systems, right? So some of the things we need to be investing more in are submarines and long-range bombers, things that are stealthy, that can operate inside defended airspace and waters, inside China's threat bubble. But we need to be, at the end of the day, we're going to have to increase defense investments for the U.S. to remain competitive.
So as a final takeaway here, it sounds like business was going to have to play a leading role in our efforts to keep ourselves in front in this arms race. Is that true?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, one of the things that's different about this technology competition from prior ones, like, say, the space race or the nuclear arms race, is this technology is being developed in the private sector. And so the Defense Department has to import this technology from the commercial sector to figure out how to use it most effectively. It's a very different kind of paradigm than this technology being developed through defense spending. Obviously, in those cases, being developed by private companies, but ultimately funded by the government. So this is a very different kind of paradigm, and we're going to need a tighter integration between the government and the private sector to ensure the U.S. stays in the lead in AI globally, and the U.S. is able to adopt this effectively for the military and other applications.
Well, that applies across the boards from military contractors all the way to energy companies, I would presume. And with that, our audience has had their morning shot of informational espresso, so we'll leave it there and tackle the day. Paul Scharre, Executive Vice President at the Center for a New American Security, thank you so much for coming by today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And a warm thank you to you, our members, for joining us today. If you want to connect or suggest a topic, reach out to us via the email on the screen or join the conversation on LinkedIn. If you missed an episode, you can see the replay on our website or catch our podcast edition anytime on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. This has been The Call, brought to you by the Global Intelligence Desk, asking the right questions to navigate uncertain times.